Welcome back. Now joining us for more on the life of Pravin Gordhan is Elinor Sisulu, a South African writer and activist. But this evening we speak to her as a friend of the late former minister. Good afternoon, Ms. Sisulu. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a day of tributes. We heard how incredibly brave the former minister was. And SABC Jonas repeating what Trevor Manuel had shared earlier in the week, that as they walked into his hospital room, Pravin said, the end is nigh. There's no turning back, almost confronting his end or his reality with the same bravery they confronted the apartheid regime with. Your reflections?
Yes, that was typical of Pravin. It was the type of person he was. He was very courageous and he was very determined as well. I think that it's unfortunate and I feel saddened that we haven't had a benefit of Pravin in his retirement when he could reflect on his career, his long career, and could contribute to the moment that we are in at present. And I hope, my appreciation of him is his contribution to the UDF during the UDF era. And I think his contribution at SARS, unfortunately, his contributions are overshadowed by the more recent years. I think he had his stewardship, his steering of SARS at the inception of the institution was incredible, and it's a huge story. And yes, his loss is very sad, and deepest condolences to his family.
You touch on a very important point, that many had been looking forward to his retirement years, that perhaps he would be among the Mavuso Msimangs, the Thabo Mbekis, where they'd infuse some sort of wisdom in the African National Congress now, or even be individuals on the outside looking in and be able to assist where they can, also join certain civil society movements, but it seems society has lost.
Yes, and I think that, intergenerational connections are very important. And major historical figures such as Pravin was, it's really good to be able to have a reflection on their strengths and their weaknesses as well. And I think what I appreciated about Pravin Gordhan is that he was a person who was open to self-criticism. At the same time, he was a person who fiercely defended what he believed in. And, there were many allegations against him, more baseless ones, and he stood tall where others would have crumbled. And he managed to stand up for what he believed in.
SABC Jonas today said he had come to bid his friend and comrade farewell, but he realized that actually no nation can bid farewell to its history. A very powerful and factual statement, quite frankly, because his contribution to our liberation is well documented. He's part of our liberation history. But listening to his daughter take us through how they lived during that period makes one remember that there was a great cost for this freedom. Wives were without husbands for extended periods. Children were without fathers. Just your reflections on the sacrifice that some of these struggle heroes actually made.
Yes, it was an enormous sacrifice of many years of almost chaos, uncertainty, tension, physical danger, being arrested by the security police, put in detention. All these things he went through, and like many other people. And I think that determination, it required a particular kind of determination and dedication. One thing that surprised me about Pravin also is, after knowing him for quite some time through my in-laws, that he was a pharmacist. And this really surprised me because, professionally, he could have just led a comfortable life, and he could have just been didn't have to get into the cauldron of politics, and yet he did. And but also he also showed that he, in terms of education, speaking with Pravin, he was one of the most well-read people I know. He had, and it was interesting that a biography that he spoke about joining the dots, because he was one of those people who could join the dots. And, in our society where we have problems where people tend to look at things in boxes and in isolation, and we can't come up with solutions if we don't join the dots. I think he was one of those people who had a very expansive and broad intellect and was always looking for solutions.
Now, Mr. Sisulu, it seems the ANC, throughout the memorials as well as the funeral today, they haven't been spared a little bit of criticism, because when listening yesterday at the memorial service and today, there seems to be some sort of a concern of racism or kind of Africanism that is creeping up within the ANC, or fueled by certain factions within the political party, which seems to exclude other racism. SABC Jonas spoke of this today, saying the African nationalism of the ANC, the original ANC of old, was inclusive, not what we've been seeing of late. Your views on just this concern now of racism between or through a certain faction within the African National Congress?
Well, I think there were ethnic dog whistles, let me call it that. For example, some people who insisted on using Jamnadas, his second name, almost as a swear word, and, not as part of a proud part of his heritage. And I think that was really unfortunate. And it's a kind of politics that has become unfortunately prevalent in the world today. And, I wish the ANC would go back to its ethos of non-racism.
And then just lastly, also, governance, good governance, state capture was quite the theme even at the funeral today. We heard even again with SABC Jonas speaking of the fragility of life, how 1 minute you're here, the next you're not. But also then expanding it to talk about the fragility of our institutions, to say we take for granted that we have a strong judiciary. We take for granted that we have a strong revenue service now. But saying that if you place the wrong people at the helm, all of that could come crumbling down. It's that fragile.
Yes, I think our institutions, one of the things, and that's what I also liked about Pravin, is that he was a constitutionalist, and he was a person who was strong on institutions. And I think as a society, we need to look at the sustained attacks on these institutions. If you look at SARS is there for the people, and how SARS is managed has enormous impact, especially on the most materially deprived and marginalized of our society. So for me, the reflection on his life is also a reflection on our institutions.
Elinor, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was Elinor Sisulu, celebrated writer and activist, as well as friend of Pravin Gordhan.